wrong in the government. Do we need to hear this today? I think so. In other words, what do you do when people in government that you have put there lose sight of the fact that they are your servants? What happens when they usurp power that they do not have? What is the proper corrective remedy? That's what we're going to talk about. And needless to say, we need this lesson, don't we? Let's first of all look at the Declaration of Independence, because Jefferson addressed this. We're on page 147, first page of the 11th principle, down at the bottom, and we're quoting here from the Declaration. He says, "Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes." What's he saying? What's he saying?
Governments that have been going on for a long time shouldn't.
Yeah, if you've had a modicum of success with your government, and something happens, especially if it's, some minor things, don't think you have to pick up your gun and start shooting up people to correct the problem. We can take it, right? A free people can take it. They can take a lot of abuse, can't they? Let's go on. "And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable." Can you suffer through a few evils in our country? Yeah, you can. "Than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed." What's he saying? Don't think you have to throw the whole thing out just because something goes wrong. It takes a lot of patience, doesn't it? But he doesn't stop there. What does he say on the next page, top of page 148? "But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security." What's he saying? What's he saying there?
We have the right and duty to get rid of.
All right. When you see that there is a long train of abuses and it looks like there's a pattern to this, which he says, how does he say it? Evinces a design to reduce them, the people, under absolute despotism. Then he says, you don't sit around and suffer anymore. You got to take action. I want to ask you something. What was King George doing to them that made Jefferson write this? Apparently, Jefferson felt that King George and his people had really come to this point where they were putting the people, or trying to, under absolute despotism. You know American history. Give me some examples. What did they try to do?
Taxes.
All right, taxes. What kind of taxes? They passed what? All right, taxes on tea and on goods, but they passed the Stamp Act. What did that do? Why was that so repulsive? Not only to many Americans, but even to Parliament. There were people in Parliament saying, we got to repeal this. This is crazy. What was it? You know what the Stamp Act was? Nearly every transaction you had in the colonies had to be accompanied by the king's stamp. And where would you get the stamp? From the king's officer. In other words, you'd pay for them in advance. If it had the king's stamp on it, then you would have permission to make that transaction. Can you believe this? And of course, that was a tremendous way to raise money. All right, what else? What else? King said, I want you, American families, to take care of my soldiers when I send them over there to help you keep the peace. What's that called? Quartering of troops. Oh, they hated that. What does that mean? You turn your home basically over to soldiers. You don't know them. They're strange to your ways. They're strange to your morality. They're 2,000 miles from home and thinking they're on vacation and they can have fun. Nobody's safe in a home like that. What else? I mean, you can read all this in the Declaration of Independence because he lists them all. What else? King George says, I don't want anybody going over the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, to the Northwest Territory, which is that beautiful, newly discovered Ohio Valley. No, Americans, you're not supposed to go over there. Can you imagine telling a bunch of independent, rugged, pioneering, spirited Americans they can't? Tried to confine them. You might get a knock at your door at your home or your business. You'd go up to the door. Who's there? Open up in the name of the king. By what authority? Writs of assistance. Ever heard of those? King authorizes us to come and search your home. Writs of assistance. Ooh, they hated those. Anyway, those and many other kinds of things, is what Jefferson said, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. Then he says, it is time, and that's what they concluded. Remember that? That we do something about this. So, what were they to do? It was their duty to throw off such government. I mean, after this beautiful reasoning, folks, if government really is made up of those willingly chosen to rule by the people, been given limited authority to rule, and it goes way off, it's time to do something. So that's what Jefferson says. And I want you to read with me John Locke. This is pretty powerful doctrine we're going to read here. But this is John Locke, the reasoning of the founders. He says, we're still on page 148, the reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property. Isn't that what we discussed? Fire department, police department, to protect property. Therefore, whenever the legislators, in other words, public officials, endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they, the officials of government, put themselves into a state of war with the people. Oh my goodness, that's pretty powerful stuff. What's he saying here? Even in a free society, theoretically, if they begin to take our property, can they do that? I should say, have they done that? For all kinds of reasons. They put themselves into, how does he say it? Into a what? Into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience, and are left to the common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. What is that? What is the common refuge God has provided for all men against force and violence? What is that? Reasoning? Well, that would be the first step. What's another one? How about just self-defense? Right? This is incredible doctrine here. When your public officials turn against you, they do not any longer deserve your obedience, and you are left to basically a state of nature and a state of war. Wow. He says, whensoever therefore the legislature shall transgress the fundamental rule of society, and either by ambition, fear, folly, or corruption endeavor to grasp themselves or put into the hands of any other an absolute power over the lives, liberties, and estates of the people, by this breach of trust, they, the government officials, forfeit the power the people had put into their hands. So, the next question comes, and comes necessarily, when that happens, what are we supposed to do? And we've already determined, have we not, that elements of this are creeping into our government at all levels. We have public officials who are doing more than they're supposed to do, who are usurping authority. What are we supposed to do about it? In other words, who can change the government? Let's answer this by reading some more of John Locke, top of page 149. He says, when any number of men have, by the consent of every individual, made a community, what does that mean? When you agree to live in a community, whether it's a school, whether it's a city, you agree to live in a community, they have thereby made that community one body, with the power to act as one body, which is only by the will and the determination of the majority. Sometimes we call that a covenant society. We agree that we will, as long as we're part of that one body, we will agree to live together and to do things together and to share resources and so forth like we do in a city. He goes on and he says, and thus every man, by consenting with others to make one body politic under one government, puts himself under an obligation to every one of that society to submit to the determination of whom? Of the majority, and to be concluded by it. What's he saying here? Who determines the direction of the body politic? The majority. Give me a definition of majority. 3/4? That would be sometimes called a supermajority, but just a simple majority. What?
More than half.
More than half? We usually say half plus one, just to make sure it's a little more than half. Let me ask you this question. How many majorities are there in a body politic? One. Why can't we say we're going to conduct ourselves according to the will of the minority? Why would that be a little dangerous?
There's not enough people that agree with you.
How many minorities are there in a body politic?
A lot.
A whole lot of minorities. How many majorities? One. And that, John Locke says, is the way the body politic should go. Isn't that interesting? So, who can change the government? The majority of the people. You see that reasoning there? Not a minority. In other words, what are we saying? If it's established by the majority, then it must only be changed by the majority. In other words, we're saying there is no right of revolt in a when we say revolt, we're talking about changing things, right? Does a minority have a right to change things? A minority? No. Only a majority. Isn't that what he says? In other words, there is no right of revolt in a minority. You imagine every minority having their opinion? What would that cause? Well, total chaos. There is only one majority, one voice. Now, this quote is not in your book, but it's in another book. But let me give you another quote from Thomas Jefferson that I really like in this concept. He says the first rule of a republic, and usually he says the last one to be learned, is that the majority rules. And furthermore, he says that the majority vote, even if it's a vote by one, even if it's a majority by one vote, in other words, just really half plus one, should be considered as sacred, as if it were unanimous. Whoa, is that powerful? The majority vote should be considered as sacred as if it were unanimous. Well, you know there are people out there who want to change the government. They're in the minority, and they don't stop by just saying, well, next time we're going to be in the majority. We're going to bring about change right now. What is that concept called? I guess there are several labels for this. It's called civil disobedience. And there are some very famous names in American history, in recent American history, who have advocated civil disobedience. You don't like a law? Then you break it. And you force change. See, that's not the method the founders said. Do not think you can change the law that you don't agree with by any other means than what? What's the means? Get a majority. What if you're not in the majority? What?
Get in the majority.
Get in the majority. Is that easy? No, that's not easy. It takes a lot of education, a lot of work, a lot of patience. That's the answer. We have such an incredible system in this country to change the government. Do you know that? Did you know that we can change every member of the House of Representatives in Congress every 2 years if we wanted to badly enough? We can throw out every legislator in every state. Most of them have elections every 2 years for state legislators. We could change the whole state legislatures of every state every 2 years. And those that don't have it every 4 years. Okay, every other 2-year period. We can change most governors every 4 years. We can change the president every 4 years. I want to ask you this question. Don't you think the founders would have loved this system? When they think of England and King George? Oh, man. Well, just when the election comes up, we'll just vote them out. Only one problem. What was that? What was their problem? They didn't have that system. What system did they have? The divine right of kings. And they said, once and for all, we are going to break this cycle of history. We're going to develop a new system and do away with this old system. That's why when we walk into the rotunda of the national Capitol, which some of you will do with me in October, and you look up in the rotunda of the Capitol, what do you see? Anybody been there? What do you see 185 feet in the air? This huge dome on the inside. It's called the apotheosis of George Washington. What in the world does that mean? Apotheosis. It means the raising of a mortal being to somewhat of God-like qualities. That's the way they felt about George Washington. He was so absent of any desire to rule over people. He had none of this divine right of king stuff in it. Even when he was offered the opportunity to be King George I of America, he flatly turned it down. Boy, that engendered him to the people. And so there you see him in this kind of apotheosis. And around him are his freedom fighters beating the tyrants of liberty. We are going to change the system of how you change your government. Anyway, beautiful, beautiful depiction. So I leave you with the thought. The doctrine of civil disobedience is wrong. It's not the founders' doctrine. If we want to change the government, then we need to get in the majority. And if you don't change it this election, then change it the next election. That takes work. But that's what we're here for, right? To learn how to do it. You first have to learn the principles, and then you go to work.